exam preparation techniques. Yes, she's not far from Claudia's presentation. Now, exam preparation is a challenging topic for any teacher, any age, of any type of student, but perhaps a bit more for us as teachers of young learners. Now, as we've seen in the previous session, our students might lack of the emotional tools and as well cognitive resources and strategies to successfully navigate some of the situations involved in taking official examinations, yes? Which basically just means that our job is twice as hard now. However, Claudia's session must have given us a lot of, like a ton of help for this. And let's hope that this session does as well. In my opinion, the solution as well runs through empathy, an exercise on empathy. Now, if we take a look at what actually the students are going through, we're going to realize that all of them will struggle with exam taking, but they're all going to do it for different reasons. They're all going to struggle with different things. Now, some of our students might have trouble with attention, and they're going to struggle to concentrate for an entire listening task. Some of them are going to struggle to pay attention while reading a text. Some of them might actually have real trouble with the actual social context where exams take place, how loud the place is, or how quiet it is, how many people there are in the room. And some of our students as well might struggle with the actual coding of these exams, the actual spelling, the words, the fonts used, etc. Not a bad idea to take all of this knowledge and incorporate it into our exam prep classes. Now, let's not forget that while our students do struggle with all of these things, they do have strengths as well. Now, these strengths are going to give us their learner types. Now, we all know the learner types. Yes, there are many different types of learners. We're going to have students who learn by watching something, coloring it in, making sure they can visualize it in maps, ideas, arrows, etc. Some students are going to learn faster if they have a chance to touch things and move things around and manipulate things. And some students actually have to hear it many times before they can acquire a piece of knowledge. But what is definitely true is that all of our students are definitely going to learn at different speeds. So something else to take into account is that our activities might have to be adapted to different levels within our class group. Maybe some students are going to need a larger amount of activities, or maybe the same amount, but the activities need to be longer. Now, we have to make sure that these are all the dimensions that we work on when we prepare classes. And now you're thinking, probably, yes, but like we saw in the session before, the finish line is the same for everyone. Yes, so there's this finish line, which is exam taking. We have to get them all there. So this is the idea. Yes, I agree with you. The finish line is the same for everyone. The exam will be the same for everyone. But every student is going to get there a different route. And this is our job. And that's the reason for this session. Now, how are we going to do it? So we're going to take a look at the 4 skills, and we're going to go one by one, and we're going to have a look at actual exam tasks from official examinations. And then we're going to see what kind of activities and dynamics we can play around with in the classroom to guarantee that all of our students get to the finish line. Now, first and foremost, I want to take a second and talk very briefly about spelling. Now, because our young learners are still consolidating spelling, reading, writing in their L1, spelling is going to be crucial when we do any kind of skill work in our classes of L2, okay? So consolidating spelling and continuously doing activities that consolidate spelling are going to help all the rest of the skills, whether it is writing or reading or obviously or listening and so on. Now, many things we can do to encourage acquisition of English spelling, especially at the age of 6 and 7. So these will be pre-A1 learners, yes? Alphabet cards. Now, how does this dynamic work? Basically, towards the beginning of the course, we can get every student to create their own alphabet cards. It's basically one piece of paper per letter of the alphabet. Make sure the letters are big, colorful, okay? And we put all these alphabet cards in an envelope. We keep it in the classroom. And then every now and then, at the beginning of the class, at the end of the class, this is a 5-minute activity where they bring out this envelope with their alphabet cards. I call out a word in English, and in pairs, they need to put that word together. It can be anything related to what's happening in the class at the moment, something that's going to happen in a second. Yes, it's a collaborative task, but it can also be individual. Yes, and they basically, they manipulate the language in a very real way, which is going to help many of the students that require more kinesthetics in order to learn. Some of the students that have a more auditory way of learning might benefit from register games. This substitutes the classic taking attendance. So instead of just calling out their names, what we're going to do just one by one in the order I have them on the list, just to make sure they're there. Instead of this, I'm just going to start spelling out random names and wait for them to realize it's them. So I'm going to go M-A-R-Y and wait for Mary to put the hand up and say, I'm here. Once this dynamic begins to get easy for them, we can complicate it by using their surname. So that's a bit more unexpected. It's going to take them a bit of thinking again, so it refreshes the activity. Once this gets already too easy, we can vamp it up again, and we can spell their names or surnames backwards as well. It's a curveball that they wouldn't expect. Something else we can make sure that is always there is classroom labels. Now that might require a bit of collaboration with other teachers who also use this room. Usually people are cool about it. Now this is gonna, making sure that everything in the classroom has a label in English is gonna expose them. And it's gonna increase the amount of exposure they receive to this L2 language. Great as well for students with different abilities. What happens with students who finish very quickly, an activity finished before everyone else, I can very quickly ask them to run around the class, find things that don't have a label yet. They can check with me the English word for it, and we can check the spelling together, and they can go on and finish up labeling different things in the class. Meanwhile, I can pay attention to the students who are still with the activity. Finally, backwriting. Very quick activity, very kinesthetic as well. Great for practicing spelling. Students in pairs, one in front of the other, both facing forward, both facing the board. Student in front with the eyes closed. Student at the back reads a word I wrote on the board. And on the back of the other student, draws the word letter by letter on the other student's back, literally backwriting. Okay, so draws an S, and the student in front needs to put together all the different words until he guesses the word correctly. Obviously, then we can swap roles, and we can do this with anything. It's a very short activity, which as well guarantees that even students who struggle holding attention for longer times, it's fine. They can take the activity because it's maximum 5 to 10 minutes long, and then we move on to something else. So, much like we are moving on now to reading activities. Now, this activity comes from Cambridge Young Learner Examinations. It's one of the reading writing tasks, and it works the following way. Students are shown a dialogue with some missing lines. All the lines, the missing lines, are put in a box outside. Now this, to our 10, 11-year-olds, is quite a challenging task. It's quite daunting first time they do it. It's a lot of text they need to process, and it can be quite complicated to manage at first. However, dealing with dialogues is one of my favorite things to do in a class. Excuse me. First activity we're going to be talking about is disappearing dialogues. What we're going to do, take the actual dialogue that's on the exam task, copy it, do the task ourselves, yeah, and do the whole text, all the dialogue together, and write it on the board. Then I'm going to read out Michael's lines and elicit from all the rest of the class Sally's lines. And we're going to go through the entire dialogue. Once we're done, I'm going to erase 3 or 4 words at random. I'm going to go back to the top and go again until the end. I'm going to read Michael, my students read Sally. Yeah. But this time we're going to have to remember what the disappeared words were. And we have to read the entire dialogue like nothing is missing. After the second time we read it, I'm going to delete more words. I'm going to keep going until the entire dialogue has fully disappeared. What happens here is that in about 4 or 5 minutes tops, we've got a whole group of students who've been having fun in an activity and just memorized almost an entire dialogue for us. Something else to make this activity a bit more engaging. Every time we go back to the top, we can change the attitude in which we read it. So we read it normally at first. Second time we read it, we can read it sad. Then we can read it angry. Then we can read it happy. We can read it sleepy, so on. However, this is a very dynamic activity. It's quite a loud activity, and some students might also need more relaxed and more calm activities to be able to acquire and to be able to maximize their acquisition from this dialogue. So here's another option. We're going to print out 2 copies of this text. We're going to make sure that the font is clear and the font is big and is spaced out. And I'm going to cut up all the different lines, Michael and Sally. I'm going to take one pack and give it to a different pair. This activity is going to be done in pairs. Every pair is going to have to look at all the jumbled lines of dialogue, and we're going to have to manipulate it to build the dialogue back. Yes. Now this is going to get the visual learners in, because they're going to be able to read Michael's line and then actually see Sally's line, read them together, see if that works or not. Now, these are 2 very good activities for working with dialogues. Something else that we can do. Now, the next activity comes from the British Council Primary English Test. Now, this activity is classic as well, is gap fill with multiple matching. For each of the gaps, we have 4 options. Now, again, this is going to be more for A1 level students. And it's an activity that as well can be quite daunting at first. So we're going to have to break it down into different steps for them. The first thing we're going to do, take 3 color pencils or crayons. We're going to use the blue one. And we're going to go to the box of words, all the option words. And we color with blue all the words that are actions. We're going to take the green and color all the words that are things in the box. And with red, all the things that are characteristic. Now, our students might not be able to grasp meta language yet. That is, they might not be able to understand the word verb or noun or adjective, but they can definitely handle the word action and thing and characteristic. So we're going to adapt that to them. Once all the colors in the box, all the words in the box are colored, we're going to take the same colors and together go to the text and draw a circle, read the first line. And when we get to the gap, we're going to circle it with corresponding color. We're going to all decide whether we need in here an action, a thing, or a characteristic. And we're going to move on to the next gaps until at the end I have like a bunch of gaps that are colored with the corresponding possible words. That's going to narrow down this exercise for them and smooth them into this activity a lot better. As well, it's great for visual learners because the color coding is always going to make it. And as well, students who struggle with spelling and coding, yeah, because the color is going to basically bridge that activity for them. Next, we can move on to writing activities. In here, another example of a British Council Primary English Test. In this task, students are shown one picture and they are given one question. What's happening in the picture? Again, another task that at A1 or pre-A1 level can be quite challenging. It can be quite daunting, which is why this is a very great way of sort of training our students to do this task or this sort of tasks. Yes. First one we're going to talk about is running dictations. Right. This activity is quite easy to implement in class. Very difficult for me to explain it here. But here's how it goes. I'm going to take the very picture I'm going to use for this exam task, and I'm going to actually do the task myself. I'm going to write up about 15, 20 words, which is about like 3 or 4 lines. Yes. I'm going to do 2 copies of it in a font that all my students can read. They're fonts specially made online for students who might struggle with coding. All right. So you're going to use a font, a big font, and I'm going to space out all these lines very well. Yes. I'm going to take these 2 copies of this text that I created and stick them on the blackboard. I'm going to ask all my students to line up at the back of the class in 2 teams, in 2 lines. First student in each line is going to run to the board. We might have to make some space. First student on the line is going to run to the board, read and memorize as much as they can, usually 1 line. Then run back and dictate what they memorized to the second in line, who's going to write it on a piece of paper. At this point, they go to the back, and the student who just finished writing passes the paper on to the third in line and proceeds to run to the front, read another sentence, run back, dictate it to the next student. And we'll continue until the entire text is done on a different piece of paper. At this point, we can swap papers between teams, we can have a look at the text, we can bring 2 or 3 pictures, and then they decide which pictures correspond to their text. Possibilities are endless, yes, but they are all getting used to the language needed to fulfill this task. And as well, it's a very kinesthetic activity. It gets them moving. Students who struggle with attention, they're going to be passionate about this activity. Believe me, the word passionate. So another thing that we can do, course book page, and that basically substitute the classic, which I'm sure is going to echo in your brain right now when I say it, classic teacher line. Now everyone open your book on page 32. So this is going to substitute that little sentence. Instead, what we're going to do is get all the students' course books in front of them, but closed. Except mine, I'm looking at page 32. And I'm going to start using some of these language relevant to a task like this to describe the page where I'm at and the page we all have to be in. Now, at this point is the students browsing through their book, listening to my description of the page, trying to find out what page we're going to do today. That's what activity. Beauty about this game is that very easy, after they are used to this dynamic, I can replace myself from this activity, put another student and show them the book and help them describe the page to their classmates. So it's a student-student interaction as well. Something else we can do with writing. This is another example from the Cambridge Young Learner examination. 3 pictures, and students need to write down the story that the pictures tell, sorry. Now, most interesting thing to use, story cubes. You have a picture of them here. Very easy to use and thousands of activities to do with them. The easiest, to put students in pairs, give 3 cubes each, they roll the cubes, they roll the dice, and they have to write down a 3-line micro story using the words they got. Something else we can also do, chain stories, which is basically projecting or showing them pictures of an example exam task. And then together in a circle, we're going to write down one sentence per image, and then pass the paper along. The next student has to read what we wrote and add another line. It's a collaborative task that is definitely going to get everyone involved. Moving on to listening activities now. This is another activity coming from the British Council Primary English Test. In this task, the students are shown 3 pictures, which are very, very similar, and they listen to a description of one of them. Yes, many ways to get them to practice this activity. It is still quite difficult. One of the most fun, for sure, is museum statues. Museum statues means asking 3 volunteers to the board, giving them a piece of paper with some instructions to follow, a position to be in, an action to perform. At this stage, when the 3 museum statues are acting out the little piece of paper, I'm going to describe one of them while the rest of the students need to guess who I'm talking about. Now that, however, is an activity that requires a lot of kids who are not afraid and not shy at all. It's quite a loud activity. Students are going to be shouting out answers. So then another possibility is battle picks, okay? It's a much more quiet activity. It's played in pairs, facing each other, book in between, so they can't see each other's images. Each student has a set of 3 images, the same images, and they take turns describing one of them when the partner needs to guess which one they're talking about, A, B, or C. We can do this with different sets. We can print out different sets, and students can play this for quite some time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Another classic listening activity, this one actually coming from Cambridge Young Learner Examinations. This is a sentence completion. Students are shown this text with missing words, and they listen to be able to complete all the sentences. Most fun way and most effective way to train our students for this task is to use active stories. This one's very easy. For an active story, I'm going to just write down on the board the name of a category. For example, transport. At this point, I'm going to start telling them a story, maybe something that happened to me this morning. Yes? And every time the students hear a means of transport, they have to stand up, clap 3 times, sit back down. Now, this is going to teach them targeted listening. So they're not trying to understand everything that I say. They're just waiting for me to say something, which is a very useful technique. And it's played in a very fun way because it involves students who as well have a bit of excess energy as well, because it's standing up, it's clapping, sitting down. It's quite a dynamic activity. I can change the word halfway through the story and then go for animals or food, anything that the students need. Now, let's move on to speaking activities. For speaking activities, this is a classic as well. 5 pictures, this one comes from Cambridge YLE. 5 pictures that tell a story. Yes, many ways for us to practice this. Probably the most obvious one, we're going to go on a circle. Project these 5 pictures, and then I'm going to say a sentence. I'm going to speak a sentence about image 1. At this point, sorry, I'm going to hold the ball and give a sentence about question 1. Then another volunteer is going to put a hand up, and at this point, I pass the ball to them, and they can give me another sentence about the first picture, or maybe a sentence about the other picture. Yes? Now, at this point, using the board is going to guarantee that only students who are comfortable speaking out loud in the middle of a class have a chance to participate. Yes? For other students, the ball situation, the ball dynamic, it lets them just enjoy and learn from everyone else's contribution to the class. Another way of playing is change spotting. I love playing that. Once my students are already familiar with the story, it's a lot smoother then. And it basically means me retelling a story that they already know, but putting in some details changed. Yes? At this point, every time they hear a change or a mistake, they have to stand up, clap 3 times, sit back down. Finally, the speaking activity comes again from the British Council Primary English Test. Students are given a set of questions, and they are asked to record a voice message. Yes? Now, in order to do this, which is, these questions are always quite general. What's your favorite activity? What do you normally do in the weekend? I suggest playing classroom password. How does this work? At the end of class, I'm going to put one of these questions on the board. What's your favorite hobby? What's your favorite activity in the weekend? Help them to brainstorm a few ideas, then give them time and say, listen, you can go home, prepare the activity, don't worry about it, prepare an answer for this, remember it for the next class. Because next class, when we come in, I line all my students outside of the class, I ask them the question, and they have to give me an answer before they go in. Yes. Now this is very malleable. I can use passwords for anything that I want to revise spelling, for anything that has come up in class. I love using it to practice speaking. Yes. Now let's bring back all the types of differences that we can have in a class. Like we said before, these activities are going to guarantee that our lessons are packed with dynamics that cater for all the different types of learners that we have. It's important to point out at this stage, yes, that all the activities that we're doing, we're actually using the same text, the very text that we're going to practice later on with them, the exam tasks themselves. But we do it before. We do these activities before we bring out the actual tasks. In fact, we might bring the task on the following class, at which point the students might recognize and might remember some of the language that we did the previous day. So instead of showing them beginning with a task and then helping them struggle through it, no, we're going to prepare the task before they even see the task. And by the time they see the real task, the process should be a lot smoother. So this is what our new objectives are. Focus on assessing the students' strengths, their interests, the areas where they can grow, and also exploring this new way of dealing with complicated tasks, yeah, grouping them in certain ways, yeah, choosing different activities, being careful, yeah, with how we distribute and how we lay out all the activities that we do, making sure that it caters for all of them. Now, I want to leave you with a final message, picking up from what Claudia told us about feedback and about especially self-feedback and self-evaluation, which is great for students. And I want to extend that to all of us. Like sometimes we tend to think of teaching as in just purely the lessons themselves, when actually the dimension of teaching is much, much wider. It begins when we begin planning for these lessons, when we assess our students, when we think of them and we empathize and we try to realize what it is that they need most and who needs what at what time. Then we're going to design all these activities, go into class and put them into practice. After this is done, I'm going to revise, I'm going to give feedback to myself and get the positive things, the things that worked and the things that need to improve. And we're going to use this information to plan again. And we're going to spiral up this way the entire course to take our teaching to the next level.